Welcome to my final presentation about Haiti. I hope that this presentation will provide some clarity on key lessons and takeaways, as well as some recommendations I have for Haiti and international aid cooperation regarding Haiti going forward. Now, as we know, I've learned that it is unclear whether the impact of international aid has been net helpful or harmful. Many assessments lean towards the latter. Indeed, aid to Haiti has been intensely criticized and has been assessed as a democratic wedge between the people and the organizations that have been established to carry out the function that the government usually carries out. A second lesson is that the constant rotation of leadership has often been due to unnecessary foreign intervention and not a lack of transparent electoral practice, as has often been assumed to be the case, or at least as has been assumed to be the case before I took a deeper look into the situation. The third lesson I learned is that the environment was the first to suffer the consequences of lack of good governance and regulation, and whether or not it's a good indicator for good governance, the protection of forests could be a good indicator is something that I could explore, or that could be explored, even though the humanitarian situation and the organized crime situation in Haiti is overwhelming. The environmental protection situation is also key to establishing sustainable and healthy and productive future, since so much of the Haitian population relies on agriculture for their employment, as well as their food security. That goes without saying. Now, the role of international aid, the main key takeaway points that I want to make clear are that the funds that were pledged were often not disbursed. What does this mean is that some funds were pledged, but only a percentage of them were actually disbursed, and this can be seen in many reports, including reports that I included in my presentation in class. Of the disbursed funds, another thing that I aimed to make clear in my presentation was that the funds were disbursed, but to who? To INGOs, to NGOs, and their functionaries. Often, very, very little of the funds actually go into the hands of the people that need it most, the Haitian people. And often the funds don't even reach Haiti. They stay in Washington, where functionaries provide technical assistance from abroad, from Panama, from New York. And finally, I wanted to emphasize the role of MINUSTA and its presence before and after the earthquake as an aggravator to the situation, both politically and in the humanitarian sense, after the cholera outbreak. As we can see, this has severely, severely weakened the international aid cooperation's reputation, and for Haitians, it represents a huge, huge trust issue, and moving forward, something must be done to address this. As far as political transition goes, I hope to have been able to outline just how chaotic the years in the post-Duvalier era have been. If you want to recap, you can look at my post where I posit the possibility of the OPL, the Lavalas political organization, as a single-party regime. But indeed, I wish to leave some nuance here. It is not so clear that this is a single party acting to oppress all other parties, because in fact, there is a lot of fractionalization within this party. And of course, the politique de développement agricole. It's really interesting to see here this very famous image of the border between the Dominican Republic on the right and Haiti on the left. And you can see that when people are disenfranchised and forced to live off the land without much regulation, often what ends up happening is depletion of resources in a way that is hard to replenish. And some key recommendations I have is that amends must be made For interventions and for the cholera outbreak, aid must be trusted to the areas of government as seen fit. Indeed, Ariel Henry, in spite of my fears that I had at the beginning of the semester, over the course of the second half of this year, has shown himself to be more accommodating than I initially feared, especially because of the allegations made regarding assassinated President Moise. He has reshuffled the cabinet according to the Montana Agreement, and some reciprocity in this sense would be a good show of faith. Another thing that I would recommend is perhaps not something that is on the priority list for many, seeing the organized crime situation is of urgent concern, but I think equally of urgent concern is the necessity of a progress report to be made on the politique de développement agricole and the environmental situation in general, seeing that it is essential for the future agricultural production and food security of Haiti and Haitians. Thank you so much for your attention.